Sakamoto Days was supposed to be doomed, and now it's the #1 show in Japan. When they announced that TMS would be working on the anime, everyone just assumed it was gonna look bad because of shows like Dr. Stone. But now we have more than 3 episodes. The animation looks great so far, and it's one of the most watched shows in Japan and the US. So you might be wondering how TMS surprised everyone by getting Sakamoto Days to #1, while also working on Dr. Stone in the same season. That's why in this video, I'm going to compare the two shows, discuss one of the biggest misconceptions in the community right now, and explain how one of the industry's most underrated studios made one of this year's best anime. So first let's talk about why everyone thought Sakamoto Days was doomed. There's 2 reasons for this, and they're both pretty simple. First of all, everyone wants everything to be animated by like the same 3 studios: Bones, Ufotable, and of course, MAPPA. And if you don't believe me, then look at the comments for my Soul Eater video. I barely even mentioned the other 2 in the video, but besides Bones, every other comment is literally just MAPPA or Ufotable. I'm going to talk more about this trend and why I'm not a fan of it later in this video, but for now, just understand that these are the default studios. And in the case of Sakamoto Days, these are the studios people were asking for. So that's part 1. Part 2 is the fact that it went to TMS Entertainment. In other words, the studio behind Dr. Stone. You might be wondering why people hate Dr. Stone so much. And it's not really that anyone hates Dr. Stone. It's more the fact that it's not Jujutsu Kaisen or Demon Slayer. Everyone knows that the animation looks great for those shows, and that's how they became so popular. Dr. Stone, not so much. Dr. Stone is known for its unique premise. You know, all the science. And it is known for other little things like cool looking characters, a beautiful soundtrack, and gorgeous scenery. It is not known for great looking fights. Not only is Dr. Stone not a battle series, but in the rare instances that there are fights, TMS doesn't exactly try very hard to animate them any better than the rest of the show. So the fights consist of a lot of static shots, panning, and animation that is fairly straight to the point without anything too creative. Which is fine considering that's not what Dr. Stone is about. But, as you can imagine, when people start to compare those fights to the fights in shows like Demon Slayer or Jujutsu Kaisen, naturally the show gained a reputation for lazy animation. And of course, because they made the show, TMS gained the same reputation. Which brings us to the initial reaction for Sakamoto Days. Granted, these fans do have a point. Not considering the slight improvements you can see in seasons 3 and 4, Dr. Stone's animation hasn't seen any drastic changes. So logically, you would expect the fights in Sakamoto Days to look exactly like the fights in Dr. Stone. And when Sakamoto Days is a series that, besides some comedy, is almost entirely about assassins and big fights, it makes perfect sense why fans would be disappointed to see TMS in charge. Hence, why so many people said the anime was doomed. That being said, these same fans have pretty much been proven wrong at every chance. But real quick, just before I get into that, make sure to become a channel member if you're enjoying this video. You'll get exclusive perks like custom emojis and badges, and you get to pick which series I cover next. But, like I was saying, these allegations against TMS have been proven wrong more than once. The first time this happened was recently when the opening for the anime got leaked. You could only see the actual opening animation. You might have been able to hear the song as well, I can't really remember for sure. But the takeaway, regardless, was everyone thought this was somehow proof that TMS was ruining Sakamoto Days. The reason for this is that in the opening there's a lot of very simple shots of characters walking around doing simple activities. So a lot of the opening is very simple, and at first glance can seem lazy. But then the lyrics dropped for the opening song, and people watched the entire opening, and immediately everyone flipped and said that they liked the opening and that they understood why it had all of those simple shots. So we went from everyone dooming the opening to everyone realizing it's actually not half bad. And for the most part, that's basically been the entire narrative surrounding this show. The first episode came out and the animation is solid. In particular, what stands out in that episode is the animation for where Sakamoto saves Shin from assassins. He jumps around and does all these John Wick takedowns. Granted, the animation in this scene isn't anything crazy, but it's fluid, it's dynamic, and it's visceral. You can feel the intensity of the action, unlike some of the fights in Dr. Stone, which favor simplicity over creativity. As a result, Sakamoto Days has become one of the most, if not the single most, popular anime this year. In fact, it's one of the most popular shows of the year so far. As of episode 3, Sakamoto Days has brought in at least 8.6 million views, making it the second biggest non-English show on Netflix, the #1 show in Japan, and the #4 most watched show overall. So really what happened is everyone knew Sakamoto Days was good, but they heard TMS and immediately expected it to be bad. And with each new episode, they're proven wrong every week. So the real question is, how did TMS pull this off, and why does Sakamoto Days look so different from Dr. Stone, even though they're made by the same studio? Well, let's talk about that, because Dr. Stone, while not as popular, is still in the top 10 shows for Japan right now. So it's not like Dr. Stone is somehow completely irrelevant while Sakamoto Days is just raking in views. Dr. Stone is very much a mainstream series. Everyone just has it in their heads that the show has bad animation. But what this stems from is mainstream bias. Because notice when everyone says they want MAPPA or Ufotable, nobody mentions Madhouse, the studio behind shows like One Punch Man and Frieren. Frieren quickly became one of the best anime ever, but you don't see people going, yeah, I want them to make Sakamoto Days. That's because everyone just wants hype fights like in Jujutsu Kaisen or Demon Slayer. Like we talked about before, Dr. Stone doesn't have crazy fights, but it does have great animation. For example, there's a scene in one of the new episodes when Gen freaks out, and you see him do all of these crazy reactions in a matter of seconds. Granted, it doesn't have that ASMR quality of a show like Frieren, but this is some great character animation. And that's what TMS focuses on in Dr. Stone. The show is all about the characters and their chemistry, so they focus on the character animation, which is why you get silly looking scenes like that, but somehow the fights just look okay. But you can see that the same talent can be applied to fights. For example, in the same episode, the characters attack these alligators, and the animation looks pretty good. So they can animate the fights like that, they just choose to prioritize the character animation. But because the fights don't look amazing, people dumb it down to bad animation. And this is where we get into the trend I was mentioning before, namely the trend of people watching really cool fights and deciding they know everything about animation. Granted, I know very little about animation, but I also don't make 1,000 posts about Sakuga and claim to be an anime industry expert. Meanwhile, people watch one episode of Jujutsu Kaisen and then decide that MAPPA is somehow the greatest studio of all time. They're a great studio and clearly they make great shows, but they're also a fairly new studio with limited resources of their own. Meanwhile, TMS is an older, larger company that also produces a lot of anime, and despite their Dr. Stone reputation, they have made a ton of amazing shows. You have to remember they made Detective Conan, a massive series. They made Sonic X, which say what you will about the English dub, but it's a great show. They made D. Greyman, Kenichi, Bakugan, the Fruits Basket remake. They also made Baki, a huge action series on Netflix. And they made Megalobox. This is a studio that has been around for years and clearly can make many different kinds of shows that do well. But because of one show, everyone just assumes they have bad animation. Really, what this shows is two things. One, there's a lot of people who only watch the mainstream anime like Jujutsu Kaisen or Demon Slayer. They see the fights, and then they assume big fights equals good animation. Because of that, they want the same 3 studios to keep making basically the same shows over and over again. The other problem is everyone focuses on fights. rightfully so to a point when we're talking about a show like Sakamoto Days, but fights are just one element. There's other elements like character animation, composition, use of CGI, and so on and so on. And I guess the reason I even bring this up is because in the world people seem to want, everything would be animated by the same studios and it would all basically look the same. What people forget is that there's a ton of different anime studios. Besides the ones we've talked about, there's A1 Pictures. They're making Solo Leveling, and I think that anime looks gorgeous. There's also Toei, which obviously is a big company, but they also got a bad rap for animation for years because of One Piece. Yet they did a fantastic job on the Dragon Quest anime. That anime is damn near perfect in terms of animation, and they did that for 100 episodes. But nobody talked about it because it wasn't one of the trending anime. You also have Trigger, which did a great job on Dungeon Meshi. There's the fairly new Studio Durian that just made the new Look Back movie. There's also Cloverworks, who did an amazing job on Wonder Egg Priority until they didn't. But they have continued to make beautiful shows like My Dress Up Darling, Elusive Samurai, and Windbreaker. So to get back to our original question, the reason everyone was wrong about Sakamoto Days is because everyone who said it was doomed was going off of a very narrow bias. TMS is a great studio that's been around forever and continues to make all kinds of great shows. But because they don't all look like Jujutsu Kaisen, people assumed they couldn't make great shows. It's this same mainstream bias that has led a lot of anime fans to narrow in on the same three studios and completely ignore like 90% of the industry. Part of why anime is in such a great state right now is because there's more studios than ever, and each studio has their own creative sense of personality, whether it's the fluid motion of Science Saru, their quirky characters of Studio Trigger, or the diverse styles of TMS. So, even though fights are a great way to show off animation, clearly there's a lot more that goes into making great shows. And that's why Sakamoto Days is a great example of how even the most underrated studios can still make fantastic anime. But now I'd like to hear what you think. What was your impression of Sakamoto Days? How would you describe this problem? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And don't forget to become a Shonen OG channel member. You'll get exclusive perks, you can pick which series I talk about next, and you can even get your name in the credits of the next video. Also, make sure to check out my other Sakamoto Days video, which you can find in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.